Welcome to A Time to Thrill. I'm your host, Aime Austin. In a few minutes, I'm going to have the pleasure of speaking with Jenny Gardiner. Oh, Jenny. So, okay, two things about Jenny. A, you totally have to go check out her Instagram. She's at the Jenny Gardiner. And the best thing about her Instagram is this dog she has. She has a lab. I would call it a white lab. Maybe it's a golden. I'll ask her. Named Pippa. And this is, frankly, the cutest dog ever. And she has this way of capturing the dog's facial expressions that makes me laugh almost every day. And the interesting thing is that she adopted one of the dogs, and her daughter, I believe, adopted a sibling, and sometimes they play together, and it's just more dog hilarity. I have no idea. I'm normally not a pet Instagram person, but for something about the way that Jenny frames Pippa that makes me smile all the time. So I would totally check that out. The other thing about Jenny is, so I met her, I don't know, let's say some years ago, in one of two ways. Either at a writing conference in San Francisco, or in the alternative, we were part of this women's fiction blog, which I can't think of the name of. It's defunct. But it was a blog of women fiction writers, and we took turns writing blogs monthly, I think, on a certain theme. And then we also put out an anthology, which is still up. It's free. And I'll include it in the show notes. So we had this blog and anthology. And so either I met her through that, or I met her at San Francisco, or I don't know which came first, though. Maybe the blog came first. I'd have to think about it. What was super interesting is, so we were in San Francisco for, let's say, a weekend or a long weekend, maybe probably Thursday through Sunday type conference. And she's gone one day, and I'm like, where'd you go? And she's like, I went on a bike tour. I'm like, you went on a bike tour of San Francisco? Which San Francisco is really small, but also really hilly. And she's like, yeah, I take a bike tour in every city that I go to. And I was like, that's a super interesting idea because A, I love biking, and B, I love traveling. And before that, I don't know if I'd ever taken a bike tour. I'd have to think about it. But once she said that, I have done nothing but take bike tours in every city I've gone to. And they all have them. They're so interesting. I went through a bike tour of like Munich, Krakow, Poland, Paris, Versailles, Amsterdam, Athens, Greece. So all these places, because of her, I started arranging bike tours. And my son, who's 11, they used to give you a basket or something. But now he is old enough to ride his own bike. And it's super fun and a super different way to see cities. And it's just, you get a little bit of exercise. You get to see the sights on a vehicle that's not a car, so you're not whizzing, not a bus, because I hate tour buses, but also not on foot. So it's certainly a perfect hybrid. And if you do it with somebody else, then you don't have to spend all your time worrying about locking the bikes or where to put the bikes or whatever. It's all taken care of. Somebody delivers you a bike and they take it away at the end of the day. So it has become this pure joy in my life, and she has changed my life in that one way so dramatically. And so every time I take a bike tour, I send her a picture. The last, obviously, was 2019. And Jenny is probably not sitting at home going, yay, more pictures of Amy's bike tours with her kid. But I remain forever grateful for changing the way I travel. So that's Jenny. She will talk about, hopefully I will ask her about her publishing journey, because it's interesting. She writes women's fiction, which is maybe, I don't know, sometimes I want to say romance is my first love, but I really do love women's fiction. But she also writes romance. And I am interested in that change or diversion in her career, because she sort of entered publishing a different way than I did. I don't know. I guess we all have different paths. But we can certainly talk about with Jenny. So, with no further ado, let's do it. Let's do this talk with bestselling author Jenny Gardiner. Hi, and welcome to A Time to Thrill. This is your host, Aime Austin. This month, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jenny Gardiner. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, how are you?
I'm mostly good. How are you?
Well, this whole coming out of pandemic thing is kind of weirding me out. So I've become like kind of a walrus on the sofa this year, you know? So
Mhm.
all of a sudden going back into humanities, it's taking some getting used to for sure.
So don't do what I do. I overdid it this weekend, and
Mhm.
I don't recommend it. I try to pack 3 activities in a day, and
Right?
because I was so excited, but it was
Yeah.
too much. I was just exhausted on Sunday. I saw actually, I don't know if you know, there's an author named Tamari Atherton,
Oh
and
yeah.
I was like, well, let me go have lunch with Tamari, and then Maggie Marr had a party
Oh, I
for
love
her
Maggie.
daughter's high school graduation
Right.
this weekend, but that was at night. And so by like midday, when I got home, I was like, "Oh no, I went too far.
Oh, you
I
got
have to."
the whole gang there. And isn't Tamary like moving permanently to England or Scotland or something?
She is. So she's been in Scotland. She just flew back for a few weeks for some
Uh-huh.
family stuff,
Uh-huh.
and I wanted to see her because I don't think that I'm going to have free entry into the UK this year.
Gotcha.
That's touch and go. So it would be easier obviously if I saw her there. So I she
Right.
was here for a week or two. She'll be back. And I was
Nice.
like, I'll see you here and then
Mhm.
maybe in Europe, but I don't know. I'm leaving next week.
Oh,
So
so good.
we'll
Yeah,
see.
my next door neighbor's daughter got married this weekend, and she was really good friends with my son. So my son and his girlfriend came in. My daughters couldn't make it, but Friday night was like the drop-in thing, you know, people do on Friday night when they come
Mhm.
in for a wedding.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, that's like my first indoor crowd thing I did. And I stepped foot in there and it was like loud and crowded and no masks and like people. And I'm like the most outgoing person I know.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden I've kind of like cowered for a second, like, can I handle this? You know, I mean, I got used to it pretty quickly. But so we had that Friday, we had the wedding Saturday, and then their brunch Sunday. So I'm the same thing. Like by the end of that, I was like, I need a nap.
I know so much so, and I got to like hug all these people, and I saw people in
Yeah.
person I haven't seen in a long time,
Hmm.
or even at a distance because I think Maggie and I sat in her backyard, and
Right.
I waved at her children and
Right.
husband, but it was I really miss it, and I'm glad I did it. But clearly, I could do one event a weekend for a little bit before I just dive into like trying to go out all the time.
Yeah, I think we gotta warm up to this, like, real world thing.
Absolutely. So I have a ton of questions for you, but first,
Okay.
okay, what breed is your dog?
She's a Labrador, she's a white lab.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was like,
Yeah.
I would just call it a white lab, but I figured there's some other term I don't know. And
Yeah.
then, what is the relationship of your dog to the other two dogs? Are they
Oh, you
siblings?
got my dog stitched down. Yeah, so my middle daughter lived in Australia for a while, and she always wanted a dog. Our Labrador that we'd had passed away while she was there,
Mhm,
and her first goal coming home from Australia a couple of years ago, she wanted a dog. So I went on this crazy hunt looking for a Labrador breeder for her. And I was at a UVA basketball game with my friend, and she said, "Oh, you're looking for a lab? Check out this one." And she showed me this picture on Instagram of her daughter's friend's lab, and it was just this beautiful white lab. And I'm like, "That's what we want."
mhm,
So my older daughter comes back. We organize this whole thing, and she's lined up for this lab. And then my younger daughter, who knew she was going to be going to medical school eventually,
mhm.
decided that she needed to get a dog. Kind of, it was impulsive because she wanted this dog to be trained and everything by the time she started med school.
Okay.
And she said, "You know what? Our last dog was sassy." She said, "I have a sassy sized hole in my heart." So our girls were living with us at the time. Kendall's boyfriend from Australia was here. And all of a sudden, they got these two puppies. So we had a house full with the two puppies. And of course, I was like, "I want a dog." And my husband was like, "No, no, we just lost our dogs." And so finally, the same breeder had another litter 2 years later, and so my dog Pippa
Right.
is half sisters with Kendall and Jillian's dogs,
Ah,
and
okay.
they are like the little BFFs. They have a great time together, and my dog is like the wild party animal,
Mhm.
and if she could wear a lampshade, she would, and so she's just always ready to go, 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 and they're like, "Can we nap?"
But I feel like Pippa, I'm gonna say this because I spend way too much time on Instagram looking at your dog and all the dogs. I feel that Pippa has much more nuanced facial expressions than her half siblings. I
She
swear to
does,
God.
doesn't she? She cracks me up. In fact, right before I got on with you, she goes to the front door and it's great that she doesn't bark. I love that. But when she wants to go out, she'll go, "Oh." And so I like believed her that she had to go to the bathroom. So I go to take her out. And I decided just in case to put her on the leash. And sure enough, my next door neighbor's daughter, who just got married, was just packing up her car and her two dogs, who my dog loves.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, she just tried to take off with me attached to her leash, you
Oh
know?
god, yes.
And she didn't want to go to the bathroom. She just wanted to go party.
Can I say this? Oh, so I'm at the physical therapist this morning because I have shoulder issues. And now
Um,
that you say this, I'm starting to wonder if being jerked by dogs who see squirrels or lizards or other
I
dogs
know.
may have something to do with the shoulder thing. Because they keep
I
asking me
think it
about an
could be.
injury. And I'm like, no, I don't know. It
I
just
had no
hurts.
idea.
But you may have just identified the
There you go.
mysterious
Look at
source
this.
of my
I'm a diagnostician and I didn't know it.
but I know that jerk, and it's always for me, it's always sudden,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I'm always the
And
la
usually it's pretty good, except if there's like something like that there, you know? So
right.
she was like, sorry, your arm does not matter to me.
I
It's an extension of my need.
That's so funny. So she wanted to go socialize and
Yeah,
thought,
exactly.
it's like, "Well, if I just stand here and make noise, she'll take me out, and then I can do what I really want."
Well, it was funny because on Saturday afternoon, they were doing some pictures before the wedding out front. And I had taken Pip out to the front to go to the bathroom. And I saw the groom standing on the porch. And he said, yeah, Katie's coming out in a second. So I was going to kind of wait out there, but I thought that felt a little stalkerish. So I
Mhm.
didn't. And I came inside, and then Pip sat at the door and just stared outside watching them. It was hysterical. Like, he was like totally, remember, like, did you ever watch Bewitched?
Yeah.
Gladys Kravitz, like the nosy neighbor, you know? It was totally Pip. She's like, zoning in on them, watching their every move while they're doing their wedding pictures.
No, so I actually had one dog who's deceased, maybe, oh god, 10
Oh,
years at this point, but his name was Jake, and the best thing okay, the worst thing is that he barked all the time, but he was a
yeah,
rescue,
that's
and
bad.
who knows? But the best thing is that he had a bark for everything, so he would bark like, he had a different bark for everything, let me say this. So,
Right.
at some point, somebody was sitting in my house, and he barks, and I go, "Oh, it's FedEx," and they're like, "Are you kidding me?" And I'm like, "No." I'm not. He's got a
That's
FedEx
great.
bark, a UPS bark, a post, the post guy bark, and then the one for cars that had the same engine as my ex-husband's car. And so,
Ooh,
but there was only a few, but because he had a sports car at that time, and so it'd either be him or one of two other people because I lived on a dead end
that's so
street.
funny.
And both houses actually where that dog lived were both on dead end streets, and so it was like, oh, it's either him or
You knew in advance,
it's
right?
yeah, or this or Sean, this other attorney who lived across the street. I'm like, so it's Sean or my ex, and then I'd look out and it would be one of the two.
That's so funny. Our one of our rescue dog, we had well, our last we had two dogs at the same time, a lab and a rescue dog,
Hmm.
and the rescue dog was also a mad barker. Oh my gosh, she barked all the time.
Hmm.
She barked at like a breeze, you know?
Yeah, no, we had one of those, and so when we rescued him, he was quite grateful and quiet, and then they
Mhm.
come out of their shell. I don't
Oh,
know,
yeah,
two,
totally.
2, 3 weeks. They're like, oh, by the way, this is my
Yeah,
personality.
I'm actually a demon seed, you just didn't know it, sorry.
But the dogs always humor me because whenever I adopt them, they're so quiet, and I'm like, so how long is it going to take before I know who you are? And then they're like, all right, well, now that I'm comfortable, let me just
Yeah,
like lay it all out.
you had it totally wrong. I know that's how Bridge was. We were not gonna get a dog. Our dog had passed away, and, we just weren't gonna get a dog for a while. We just built a house, and we'd gone to the Plow and Hearth outlet, which is like a housewares kinda store, and
Hmm.
they were having this big closeout sale or like a fall sale, and we were looking for a fireplace screen in our new house, right?
Hmm.
And we had company coming that night. We were in a hurry. It was a big, long drive. And we pull up there, and they have like the Greene County Rescue League with a
Oh
bunch
yeah.
of puppies.
Hmm.
And so we're like, you kids, stay with the puppies. We'll go look for a screen. So they just kept coming and badgering us that they wanted to take home this like precious little tiny puppy with blue eyes. And I was like, no, 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 no. And my husband came first. And the funny thing is, we'd all said the next time we got a dog, it would be Bridget.
Hmm.
And I came over to look at this puppy, obligatory look. I wasn't going to get a puppy.
Hmm.
And this woman was with her daughter, and she goes, Bridget. And I was like, what?
Oh no.
And so I like clutched that dog. I was like, she's ours. So we brought her home and she was so passive, so docile, so chill. And it was only because she'd had like bad parasites. And as soon as I got rid of that, she was a wild dog. We
Mhm.
called her the pickup truck dog, living in the minivan world because she was like a wild beast and ran away all the time. She
No.
was a funny girl.
No, they're interesting. I've had many dogs. Well, no, I'm at the age where I've had many dogs over
Yeah,
my lifetime.
yeah.
And who knows what the future holds dog wise. So I have a ton of questions for you.
Sure.
Okay, so I met you. Well, I have two main questions. One, I'm forever grateful for the whole bike tour thing because it changed how I travel.
Oh, I know. That's so good.
Forever. And I was saying in the intro, I'm sure that you're not like, hey, look, she's on a bike tour in Munich. And I'm like, I'm going to send you a picture every time I go because
Isn't
it
it
just,
the best way to see the world? I love it so much.
it is. And I don't know why I didn't think of it before. I swear I have done it before and it didn't stick for reasons I can't imagine because I go biking almost every day, like in my real
Right,
life. And
right.
so I don't know why it didn't translate. But as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, and
Of
so like,
course, yeah.
I subsequently have done it like a couple of times in France. I've done it in England,
Mhm.
Amsterdam, which is obviously easy.
Yeah.
But like Krakow and then Munich and then even Athens, which is like biking through LA. So I don't know if I ever recommend that, but it was
Oh my
interesting.
gosh, yeah.
Nonetheless,
Paris is a little tricky sometimes.
yeah, I didn't,
Um,
not my favorite.
I when we went to that conference in San Francisco that one time, right?
Hmm.
And I stayed an extra day or 2, and I did San Francisco, I did a bike tour, which was really fun, and I thought it was gonna be all steep hills, but
That's what, yeah.
there's these great ways around it all in San Francisco, which was nice because 'cause I'm not a fan of hills.
I wondered about that because that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't do it. So I have a friend, well, she left to move to Alameda after she had twins, but
Mhm,
she lived in San Francisco for 20 years. Like when we all graduated, she moved there instead of moving somewhere else. And she was biking all the time. She lived in the Marina District, but those
mhm.
hills, and I don't mind hills, like if it's a longer trip, but not to go
Right.
out casually. Like
Right,
that's
right,
to
right.
me not the height of fun. So when you said San Francisco, I was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, do you bike around the
No,
financial
there's like this
district or
great
the wharf
cutaway
or
there. I
yeah.
forget what it's called, but it like it minimizes a ton of the hills when you're riding through San Francisco. Because trust me, I otherwise would never, ever, ever do
Mhm.
it.
So I'll add that to the list when I
There you
don't know, the
go.
next time I don't know, go somewhere. So
That's right.
it feels distant. So how did you start publishing?
So I was like, well, I was young. Oh, God, that's hard to believe I was young back then. But I had 3 little kids, and I was kind of like bogged down in the fog of motherhood for a while, so you're just not getting anything else much done in your brain.
Mhm.
And the kids had gotten a little older and independent. And I mean, for years I had just read like a page in People magazine before I passed out at night. And then I started reading again. And every time I was reading a book, I'd think, I could write better than this.
Mhm.
And then it just kind of was this weird little thing. I was talking to somebody, I don't know if it was like with a group of friends, we were out with friends, and we were talking about this one guy we knew who was just like really kind of uptight and just not a really fun guy. I would never want to be married to him, right?
Mhm.
And I said, God, he'd be like sleeping with Ward Cleaver. Like you remember from like Leave It to Beaver?
Yes.
And then I was like, wow, that'd be a really good book title. And so then I just decided to make a book that fit the title. And that's how I kind of started. It was just, I took this, I just took this woman who had like, it was like a coming of middle age novel,
Mhm.
And so it was a woman who had kind of thought she married Mr. Right and then wakes up one day with 5 kids and she's married to Mr. Always Right.
Mhm.
And I just kind of based it on the concept of that guy, but it was kind of just like this amalgamation of, how you sit around with a bunch of women drinking wine and people are bitching about their partners.
Yes.
And you just kind of throw all those things in the mix and that's what came out.
Wow, that's so interesting. I think now I just call it like the hubris of new writers because the only
Right.
way that we ever get there is we read books, we go, okay, I could do better than this. And then
I know, right?
you sit down to do it and you go, well, this is harder than I
Cocky.
thought.
Who do you think you are? And then you think you can sell it? No.
I know, exactly. But it's just without that hubris, I don't know if anything would ever get
Right,
written. But it's
right.
just that that, and I only had it once where I was like, oh, I could. And then I sat down and it was so much harder than I ever thought it was. I don't know.
Exactly.
Oh my God. It took, and we're not going to discuss the number of years it took to finish one book. That I had to rewrite like 8 times because it was just a mess. But it got better. But it was just that first, it's the hubris. And then I was like dogged. I was like, well, I can do it, and I just wouldn't give up.
Look at you now, right?
I know, but it was just, it's hubris probably plus determination. Maybe
Yeah, I
even,
mean, then you get dug in. Exactly. I am
right.
not going to screw this up.
Or even when I finished the first book, I was like, oh, well, if I can write one, I can write the second one. The second one will be better. We can have a whole conversation about that. But,
Well, this is funny with so many authors, like with bestsellers, and their next book is awful,
mhm.
So it's definitely a challenge.
It is. But I wrote the first 2 or 3 books before I had a publishing contract. So there was no pressure. It was just
Yeah.
me. And then I sold book 2 and book 3. And then book 1 lingered a long time, but it's available now. So,
There you go.
but it was that was a slog.
Thank you,
So
self-publishing.
I know exactly. I had an agent for that book for years. I'm sure everybody in New York has rejected that book, but it's actually my bestseller, so I'm good with it now.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
I'm good. It all worked out in the end. So one of the things I wanted to know is I have a love. Okay, I'll read almost any genre, maybe not fantasy and science fiction on a regular basis. I've read both,
Right.
but it's not my thing.
Yeah.
But everything else I'll pretty much read. But my 2 biggest loves, I think, are romance and women's fiction.
Mhm.
And they may be split equally. But do you still go back and forth or no?
I used to be only women's fiction,
Mm-hmm.
and then I kind of call it the trauma, drama, and angst thing. I got really tired of it. Like it just felt like women's fiction got super Oprah-fied,
Mm-hmm.
and it just got so much more gloomy. And so I kind of diverted away from that, which is when I kind of got into more reading like rom-coms. I'll read a lot of different things, but I'm like you, I won't do fantasy. That just doesn't do it for me, or sci-fi or anything. I like good suspense as long as it's not like graphically violent. I don't like
Mm-hmm.
that at
Yeah,
all.
no.
Um, and I also, I don't like dystopian fiction because, like, to me, reading and writing, frankly, is escapist.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to go to the end of the dismal world where everything sucks. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I can just turn on the news for that. So, so yeah, I kind of definitely, I haven't really picked up much women's fiction in a long time. I'll pick up other things. And this is going to sound super weird, but in the midst of the pandemic, when I was wide awake at 3 a.m. every morning,
Mm-hmm.
I had read a bunch of novels that I really liked. And then I was out of a book at 3 in the morning and I was on my Kindle and I didn't want to turn it really bright because I didn't want to wake my husband up.
Right.
And so I couldn't find another book to read without like doing that. But I knew one of my 3-book series had been a book bub like the day before, and I had downloaded it
Mm.
because I hadn't downloaded it before.
Right.
And so I just clicked on it thinking, well, I'll fall asleep in a couple minutes, I'll be good. And I hadn't read any of my books before. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, since after I wrote them.
Right.
And so I started reading it and I was like, I really like this. This is good. So I read all of my books over the past several
Oh,
months.
wow.
And I was really happy to say that I like them all because I literally, they're out of my brain the minute I'm done writing the book. I
Oh
couldn't
God, no.
tell you stories or characters or anything about them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I kind of gorged in my own books, which sounds really weird, doesn't it?
No, it's super interesting because I always intend to reread them, and sometimes I'm looking in a series when I'm doing series work.
Right.
Sometimes I have to flip through them, and I will get sidetracked. Everything sidetracks me. But one of the things actually I
Yeah, me
did
too.
during the pandemic, I didn't read all my books, is I was having a thought about first lines. Maybe I was reading an article, and maybe somebody had said something about the first line of every book. So I got out a huge piece of paper. I keep like one of those like 18 by 24 pads, and I can put
Right.
stuff on the wall. And I wrote out the first line of every book I've ever written. And
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to be honest. Only 3 of them are good. But
Oh.
I know it's not my strength. I realized that when I wrote
Oh.
them all out, I was like, oh, okay, well, it's not the best of times and the worst of times. I mean, I know. So,
It was a
and
dark and stormy night.
right, and those are two of my favorite first lines. So I was just like, oh, okay. But one of the first lines I wrote is a book about sex trafficking. It's not a happy topic, but
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite books of my own. Like it's just because the character is so clearly speaking,
Uh-huh.
and rings so true for me. But that's so interesting that you read your own books because I don't. Well, I don't. I guess I have all the time in the world. I haven't done it, but now having done it, oh, I have so many questions. Do you have like a sense of the progression of your writing in terms of either craft or a theme or some sort of other evolution?
It was at first because I started reading what I downloaded, which was one of my BookBub deals, and
Right.
so it wasn't in sequence of what I'd written in the order of how I've written my novels. Um, but after that, I kind of went back and started going in order,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought it was informative to see um, how my writing fine-tuned more than I thought it had.
Mm-hmm.
How I was happy that I wasn't more redundant because I was afraid I would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't have as many cliches as I worried about.
That's great.
I can get cliche driven. I mean, I was a journalism major, and you come up being I was TV news. So if you watch TV news, it's just one cliche after the other.
Right.
That's every intro on a TV news program, right?
Right.
It's painful but true. So that's a bad habit to shake for me, to be honest. But I really like smart writing and smart ass writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I held quite true to that in all of my stuff. So I laughed out loud, which made me laugh that I laughed at my own writing. That's
Okay.
kind of weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was reassuring to me. And one of really the overriding theme is, I mean, I've written a lot of books. I've published, I don't know, almost 40 books.
Right.
And yet you can get I don't know if demoralized is the right word, and so it gave me some a kind of a boost of self-confidence again in my writing because I was starting to just kind of feel like a little in the trenches with it and not as enthusiastic about it and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I read those, I was kind of like, well, I'm ready to read my next book, but I haven't written it. So
Okay.
I need to get cracking, so that was good.
No, so sometimes I'm gonna be honest, I call it my journeyman job because
uh
some days it just feels like, well, let me just get up and like, make the donuts or break break the bread or whatever
right,
it is. It's like, well, let me just
right.
do this thing and then tomorrow I'll do more of this thing until the end.
Yep.
And in the pandemic, well, I didn't finish any books in 2020. I started 3 and
Oh,
didn't
that's good.
and
That's a
finished
start.
none. And I finished 2 of those this year. Wrote an extra one because I got sidetracked. And then I've taken a hiatus, I'm gonna be honest, but I'm going to finish the other one this year. I was just thinking about it yesterday and I was like, I should open that again.
I
But
kind of think like the hiatusing was all self-care, so that's good. All good.
yeah, but it was interesting. One of the distractions was having a child at home doing Zoom. So
Yeah,
he is a little bit of an extrovert, a lot of an extrovert. So rather than be in his room, say with the door closed, which I've heard other children do, or even with headphones, he's just got like Zoom like full on volume with like lots of like 10 and 11-year-old kids talking all day.
Oh my gosh, that was perfect for you. Now you can write YA, right?
I know because
So like
they
middle grade fiction.
Oh my God. If I hear anybody say that's sus one more time, I swear to God. So like,
You're
but
like
they,
totally hip to the tweens.
yes, like all these things. I was like, is this like slang? I was like, this is slang. I don't even know. Just so many different phrases. And then my son makes fun of me. But with that, I wasn't able to like have the quiet concentration that I obviously require for writing.
Yeah, of
And
course.
it took me, I have noise canceling headphones, but the little cord is kind of short. And so
Right.
it took me till halfway through the pandemic where I realized I could buy wireless headphones. And I was like, wow, this took like way too
I know,
long
and you could tune them out.
to figure out like how to do it. And then things got better. But
Right.
you are one of the few authors I know who went from women's fiction to romance because usually the transition is the other way.
Right, exactly. In fact, when I first got into writing, I met this woman. I guess I read her novel and I sent her an email and just said, "Hey, I really liked your book."
Hmm.
And we became friends. And, she would kind of she kind of took me under her wing a little bit. And she was
Hmm.
like, "Well, you are going to need to prepare yourself because you're probably going to get thrown in the pink ghetto,"
Right.
which I didn't know what she was talking about. And she was like, publishing houses like to throw women into romance and until they think they're ready to put them in women's fiction. And I was
Exactly.
like already kind of writing women's fiction. And so it was kind of funny because I didn't come up reading romance or anything like that. And it just wasn't in my repertoire.
Hmm.
And, I guess chick lit was coming into its own for
Right.
12 days, and so I read chick lit until that died a quick death, and at that point, I did just start to get tired of women's fiction, and then I was really early into, indie publishing my own books
Hmm.
online, and I have the voice that is very strong,
Hmm.
and oftentimes you have an editor that either likes it or doesn't like it.
Yes.
And especially a lot of editors were like, right out of Vassar or whatever, and they
Hmm.
just weren't, mine's like kind of smart alecky voice and stuff, and they weren't getting me.
Hmm.
And so I was kind of tired of dealing with, submissions to editors who didn't get my voice. And I also well, I guess by then I'd had my second book published with a publishing house, and I got orphaned. My editor left in the middle of it all, which was heartbreaking. And
Hmm.
I got tired of the many vagaries of publishing house publishing,
Right.
which was why I then switched over to indie. And what was selling really well was romance. And I
Right.
was like, I can do that,
Hmm.
which is how I got into publishing. I can do that. I can write that. So I just kind of started writing that. And, I started thinking, like, what are the movies I like? I always like romantic comedies. I like Nora Ephron stories. I like, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so it was a really easy segue for me. And, it was comedy series in particular that I just started getting into. And my first one that I did was I was really interested in just doing like a riff on Roman holiday.
Hmm.
So my series, It's Raining Men, came from that. The first book from that was, I think, is that my series? God, I forget the names of everything. Something in the air, Heir, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
it was
Right.
basically, I created a fictional European royal principality or whatever,
Hmm.
and had a prince come to America and end up having to escape his fate that he didn't want.
Right.
And so that was a fun series to write, and that was a good challenge because I had to just really go to a whole different zone to write that because I didn't have the whole royal thing. I had to do a lot of research. It was, this world with people with money and fashion and, all that kind of stuff. So I had to do a lot of research on that, which was funny because, once you start doing that online, they start feeding you ads for all that stuff.
Yes.
So, I was getting fed ads for like, expensive jewelry and the best real estate in the world and, luxury yachts. And I was like, you guys have it totally wrong.
That's so hilarious.
But,
Um,
but yeah, so I mean, it was a fun digression for me, but I also have this little part of me that kind of wants to write something meatier, which is what I'm also working on. So
so then the question is, okay, if you didn't grow up reading romance, well, not how, because I don't know. I grew up reading romance. I don't have a good way to
yeah.
figure it out the other way. How did you learn to write romance? Because it's a fairly structured type of writing. Uh,
Yeah, and guess what? I didn't do that very well because at first I wasn't even because I didn't realize that you kind of basically went chapter to chapter point of view,
mhm.
and so I was doing like head hopping, which I was then told was like you can't head hop, which is funny because you read books where people are head hopping all the time in there,
Yes, that's true. Yes.
and for if listeners don't know what that is, it's just basically changing point of view in the middle of a paragraph or whatever,
Right.
and that can be confusing to readers, but it can work too. So
Mhm.
I had to kind of just find my way as I did it. And also, like, writing snappy dialogue was a little bit tricky.
Mhm.
Um, my narrative fiction I had, but the dialogue bit I had to work with. But I definitely got that because, again, I laughed a lot at my stuff. So that was good.
Mhm.
Uh, maybe I was just really bored. It was a pandemic. So yeah, I think it was just sad, and I think really just watching romantic comedy movies informed that storytelling too.
Was that a favorite movie genre?
Oh, completely. Yeah, exactly. I
Oh.
mean, I am not that person who goes to see slasher, blood, anything. I just like, I'm so happy Netflix has so many rom-coms now. It makes me very happy.
That is actually that is very true.
Right?
They have a huge cache of them. So what? Well, okay. You, you were just talking about the change of women's fiction, and I think I hear what you're saying. So I have been reading less of it, but I'm not sure. How can I say this? Uh, the, Okay, there's a book by this author named, I want to say, Robin Lee, called, oh, I can see the title. It's like something about you or something. I'd have to think of the title. And it was really popular a year ago, or maybe during the pandemic, but I'd read it before, which was sort of like the way women's fiction was in the 80s and 90s when I read it. It was like basically a woman with a problem, but not cancer. Or
Yeah,
nobody.
I know that's the thing is they all got to be like some horrible disease or whatever. I
Right.
don't want that. Yeah.
No, so I do miss those, and but part of me wonders if they still exist. So I get ads because obviously it's the same with the yachts. I don't get yacht
Right.
ads, but I do
Right.
get a lot of women's fiction emails and things like that. And every
Yep.
time I read the description, well, Adirondack chairs, I can't with the Adirondack chairs, but
Exactly. And the painted toenails on the beach. I get it.
exactly,
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
those fireflies in a jar, whatever. So yes,
The rain boots in front of the colorful house. Yeah.
yes. So so I mean, I know, like I know because I'm like clicking on it, but it always starts with so and so died, and the heroine is going to go back to this small town. A
Yep.
lot of them coastal towns, which is maybe why the
Yep.
Adirondack chairs.
Yep.
And then she's going to find the true meaning of home, the true meaning of family, the true meaning of love,
Yep.
or the true meaning of whatever the
Yep.
fourth thing is. And okay, so I want to read less of that. But
Yeah.
I wonder if the other books still exist and are just not advertised. And I had this conversation with Kilby Blades as well, who writes women's fiction, obviously, but she can't write, enough books to feed all of us. And
Right.
I don't know if those other books still exist because I do like the angsty thing, even if there's a little bit of romance, that's great. But I do like those women have like an internal journey that
Right.
doesn't have to do
Exactly.
with like death.
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't have people dying, doesn't have, child with cancer,
Right,
does it? Yeah, or know some like violent thing that happened to them.
right.
Yeah, totally. I don't know. I think I just stopped looking, to be honest.
Well, that's what
I
I'm
just,
wondering too, because I wonder
yeah.
was I oversaturated with the rain boots and the Adirondack chairs such that I just stopped looking because I kept like
Yeah.
clicking and clicking and clicking or whatever it is,
Yep.
and then you're like,
Yep.
okay, well it's 10 of these, I need to walk away.
And you know what? Like on BookBub, I mean, I subscribe to BookBub. Who
Right,
doesn't,
right.
right? And when I get my daily feed, I'll see the women's fiction that's being offered there, and I'm like, does this differentiate from anything else that I've already read like this? And oftentimes it just doesn't compel me enough to do it.
No,
I
and
mean, they may be sitting in my Kindle, but I haven't picked them up.
neither have I. But now I miss it so much that now I think I want to go look
I know you're
for
gonna have to go on a search.
to see whether or not those other books still exist because I do like that kind of story. I think maybe even more than I like romance.
Okay,
Um,
then you're gonna have to pick up Sleeping with Ward Cleaver, girl.
it's on my list now. I mean,
um,
I have a
It's
long
funny,
airline
that's the
flight.
one book I did and listen to me, now that I think about this, I reread all of my rom-coms, but I have not reread my women's fiction novels,
Uh,
and I probably have, I don't know, 6 or 7 of them,
mhm.
and I haven't reread them yet. Isn't that funny? I stopped with the rom-coms.
That's so
I
interesting.
guess I like escapism a lot. I don't know, go figure. I have to get to them and see. I will say this, when I got my rights back to Ward Cleaver, and I had to kind of go through it again before I published it. I had to defuck that book a lot. I had so much F bomb in there. I couldn't believe it myself, quite frankly. But even for that, for women's fiction, that was very it didn't follow the rules at all.
Mhm.
So which was why it was hard to get a publishing deal for that book.
But ultimately, they did. I mean, you did sell it.
Well, what happened with it is I won a national fiction contest, and the prize was that. And
Ah.
weirdly enough, because again, I never even read romance, it was a contest sponsored by Dorchester Publishing, which was the last of two independent publishing houses in New York City at the time.
Right.
And Romantic Times Magazine, which I didn't even know about.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really truly a marketing contest, but it was pitched as a fiction contest. And, you submitted to the publishing house and they chose the finalists. And interesting, the editor was a male,
Mm-hmm.
and that's who picked my book. And that didn't really kind of surprise me, actually, because I grew up in a house with three brothers. So I think that informs my writing voice a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of, yeah, that makes sense that a guy would probably like my writing voice. I don't know if that makes sense or not. But anyhow, with that novel, the end of my first chapter is like leading up to, it's a Sunday night. Life is just bogging her down. She's got all these kids. She's tired, her stressed, her husband's checked out. And it's Sunday night because he like wants to get laid. And she's dealing with all the hassles of, kids and bedtime and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the chapter, she just calls him the fucker,
Mm-hmm.
which is not romance, right?
Right.
But because it was co-sponsored by Romantic Times, they wanted to slot it as romance.
Wow.
So it was an interesting dilemma because I won the contest really because it was a marketing contest. Each month you had to submit a sample chapter
Mm-hmm.
and then people voted on it, but the goal was to get as many people voting as possible, and I was really good at getting that out to as many people to vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like to say that it was my book that won, but I really think it was my efforts to get people to vote for my book that won. And so I went to what's the big book conference that they used to have in New York City every year?
Oh, yes. Wow.
You know,
Yes.
anyhow, I went to that, and the guy who was the sales guy, the national sales guy for Dorchester, looked at me. He said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with your book. I wish it hadn't won." I
Oh
was like, "Oh,
gosh.
thank you so much. So sweet. Thank you." But it was kind of, because publishing houses are very, they've got their system down.
They
And if it
do.
doesn't fit in that system, they don't know what to do with it.
Oh,
So,
well, I think that is really what gave birth to a lot of self-publishing because there were so many
yeah,
stories. I remember this when I was reading a lot of ton of romance that were category romance when I was 13, 14, 15. And I was like, well, I like these, but every so often they would publish one that was different. And I was like, okay, I want more of this. But by the time they published the writer's second or third book, they had like whipped the writer into line. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah, totally.
And I'm like, oh, but you bought this person's book with a unique voice, but now you want her to sound like everyone else.
Then we're going to change you. Yeah. I mean, they do it with music too, don't they? Kelly
Yes.
Clarkson
Yeah.
or whatever.
Mm.
So, yeah,
Um,
exactly. You have to do this and that's it.
and I found that to be somewhat disappointing. So self-publishing at least has expanded that because there's so many of the kinds of stories that I always wanted to read that are
Right,
now available.
right,
And I'm
right.
like, well, thank goodness because for that. But did you start self-publishing in 2013 or earlier than that?
Yeah, I started really early. I don't know, 2010, 11. I was kind of like, it was frustrating because so my first novel was with Dorchester, and when the economy died in whatever that was, 2008,
Right.
Dorchester went under,
It did. I remember
owing
that.
me lots of money that I never saw.
Right.
And my agent, I had just sold a memoir with my agent to a publishing house, and that was things were getting really bad in publishing. Then everything was really kind of tenuous, and then my editor quit the business altogether in the middle of my book, and so I was just frustrated. And my literary agency launched its own imprint, and I was like, "This is really a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go ahead and put a book with them," because it was a book my agent had been shopping and it wasn't going anywhere because publishing was upside down at that point.
Right.
And it would have worked out, but my agency just wasn't ready and hadn't done it well. And they just didn't do what they needed to do to get it going.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, I just was like, all right, okay, in 3 years, I've got like these three books flapping in the wind. This is not okay. And at that point, I was really early with a Kindle. And to me, this was like a game changer to have all your books in one tiny device like that.
Right.
And, I was like, it just needs competition. And then the iPad came out.
Right.
And so I knew things were going to go differently fast. And it's funny, I had been at RWA the year I don't know when it was, 2009, 2008, something like that. And they every year at RWA, which is like the Romance Writers of America, which was like the conference for most women writers,
Right.
they would have a panel with like industry professionals, and then the audience was women who basically were desperate for publishing deals.
Yes.
And so they would, basically kind of suck up to them, right?
Hmm.
So they would ask these questions of the industry people, and somebody said, well, what about self-publishing? And they're like, oh, 20 years from now, maybe, but not now.
Oh my
And the
gosh. Yeah.
very next year, everything had changed because so many romance writers who had been kind of the bread and butter of publishing, but they weren't, they were the ones that were just kind of cranking things out, whereas they weren't like the, John Grishams of publishing, right?
Right. Right.
Publishing put all their money on the John Grishams and didn't want to deal with any of the mid-list authors. And so all these romance authors got their rights back to their books and started publishing themselves. And most of them were smart, savvy women who knew what to do and knew how to market and everything, and changed the game overnight. And so the next year at that conference, it was so funny because every year women would just suck up to these people
Hmm.
on the panel, and all of a sudden it was like, what have you done for me lately? And it
Uh,
was a really empowering moment to see that, because all of a sudden so many writers woke up, and especially, for years women writers have always been secondary to men. And
right.
you've got men who can write like what's kind of termed dick lit, which
Mm.
is like chick lit only for guys. It's a slacker guy who's unable to commit, who has a lousy job and just floats around. And they would get paid 5 times what a woman would get paid for a chick lit
Right.
novel,
Hmm.
and get much more muscle with the publishing house behind it. And so all of a sudden to see these women just like take the power and do it themselves was great. And by then, and there was one other guy who was a very, very, he'd just done a lot of things in publishing over the years. And he had stood up on a panel and he said, if you're not doing indie publishing right now, the train's going to run you over.
Wow.
And it was super early in it. And so at that point, I was already, getting it all together and getting my books in that way. And for me, it was really just a decision of putting it in my control more than you could have with New York publishing houses, because
Hmm.
everything's out of your control, whether
Right.
it's your cover or your title or your, whether your
Sometimes
editor.
even your name. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And I was just over that. And at the time, the buyer for Barnes and Noble decided everything about, whether your book was going to come out XY time, or whether the cover was going to be blue or red, or,
Right.
all kinds of things. And I was just kind of over it. So at that point for me, it made a lot of sense to do it. And I was glad I got in early. It was, because it got much more complicated. So the funny thing is now I'm kind of like, maybe I should go back to New York houses, because being your own publishing house is a lot, and I don't love that either. And it's gotten more complicated.
No, so there's so many issues. I mean, but I remember those conferences. I went to a couple and then I had a baby. So then then I don't know there's a
Yeah,
couple of years that got lost in there. But I
yeah,
do remember that after my first RWA conference, I want to say it was like 2006, 7, something like that. Whatever
me too.
it's San Francisco, I think.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I had no kid then. And I remember that feeling that I was paying $600 or whatever it was for the privilege of being offered up to the publisher. And I felt like a lamb led to slaughter because
Yeah,
there was so much smoozing. I can't say that word right now of those editors. And I still know them all by
yeah,
name because it was like, they were like rock stars at this
yep,
place. And there's like 2,000 women and like 20 rock stars.
yep,
And sort of, hoping that you get to that party or that dinner. And that was it was my first conference like that. And it was startling. And I was like, okay, but if I want this is what I'm going to have to do. But that's about the time when a lot of the authors I know who, especially those writing category romance, were topping out at 5,000 a book. So
yeah,
they were
exactly.
getting whatever that would be the advance, especially for a couple of the Harlequin lines. And they knew that they were not going to get any more dollars after that.
Yeah,
And that's not a lot given the effort that, it takes to write a book. And
not at all.
it was really starting to be limited to that. And so people I know were, especially people who were living on it, were cranky. Well, I have to do 10 or whatever it is to, pay this
Yeah.
mortgage or pay for my kids to go to college or whatever the
Mhm.
thing is. And that was an interesting time. And then it changed right after that, especially with like the Harlequin lawsuit. There were all these things that were sort of fomenting. with ways to not pay authors, and then authors
Yeah.
got out from under it. But it was so, I'll never understand. I have friends still, I think, who work in New York publishing, but I went to one of those schools on the East Coast where a lot of people went into publishing. So when I first
Mhm.
graduated from college, they were like so into supporting these poets and these
Yeah.
guys. And
Yeah.
but the bread and the money that was keeping the lights on was all these women writing these mid-list books, you know?
100%, and then they dumped them all,
They
and then
did.
they had the best revenge. They're
Mm.
like, "See ya, I'm
See ya.
gonna make $1,000,000, goodbye."
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was kind of the beauty and the not beauty of Amazon was that I used to watch the Amazon folks at conferences,
Mhm.
starting from, like, around 2006 when I would go to them, and they were just a different breed. They were very buttoned up, and honest to God, even, like, the one guy, his jeans would be, like, ironed,
Mhm.
and they were very, very, corporate
Right.
and businesslike and, but hungry,
Mhm.
and you could just really get that sense, and I knew that things were happening there, but publishing was dismissing Amazon constantly,
I
like, at these
know.
conferences, Amazon, whatever," and at the time, they were this infinitesimally small percentage of sales of books, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, when the Kindle came along and Amazon did what they do, which is make books a loss leader, so they offered authors, 75% royalty versus, the royalty we were getting for books with a publishing house was between like 4 and 7%
I
per book,
know the 6. Yeah, I
and
remember
so
it. Yeah.
I mean, are you kidding me? Of course I'll take 75%. Ultimately, I mean, I was saying this all along, like, A, don't put your eggs in one basket because they're using us and we will be cast aside one day too,
Right.
which certainly happened.
Mhm.
But, milk it dry as much as you can and use it however you can to try to advance your business. So,
No, it was a super, it has been an interesting, like, decade plus. Like, it's just been,
yeah.
I don't know. Like, I watched it. I mean, I was, participated in it. So it was
Oh,
just interesting to see how that went along. What so and so I do know a few authors. Well, I know a lot of authors, but I know a few who are having that sense where they want to move back to traditional publishing. But I'll ask you this, because this is something we talk about all the time. Backlist management is like no joke. So what publishing houses often did is they just didn't do it. So I mean, they would keep
yeah.
your rights,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
if your 15th book or fifth book or whatever it was became
Yeah.
successful, then they would recover and
Yeah.
redistribute your old
Yeah.
books.
Yeah.
But for basically they let them languish, and it
Yeah.
was what it was, and there was no ebook, so
Hmm.
they remaindered it or pulped it or whatever.
Yeah.
But what is, I guess, one of the things that, and my author friends and I are talking about, that's becoming sort of daunting, is the backlist management. So I was just talking to Grace, an author, about this, and we are talking about like recovering all the titles or dealing with distribution, which is the thing I was telling you about before we started recording, like dealing with
Hmm.
distribution issues, and those kinds of things are taking up more and more time, because having, like, I don't know, when I started, I had like 2, 3, 4, 5 books, and that was utterly manageable. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
now, I have 25, and they're like in audio or in, paper
Yeah.
and all these things, or in bundles or whatever the stuff, it is. And it becomes a lot more to manage. And
Very much.
I and a lot of others, even with assistants and things like that, are spending a lot more time managing the backlist or translations or whatever than you have there's only 24 hours in a day, then more than time you can dedicate to the front list. And
Well, and that's like me failing to manage the backlist well, which I should be doing better than I am. And like now I'm like, I have, I think maybe 40, 39 books, but I think about doing audio on them, but I haven't because that's a lot of money to outlay for that. Is it worth doing?
Mhm.
Most of my books sell in digital, not in print. I don't do a lot of print sales. So would that be the same with audio,
Mhm.
and same with translations? I should be doing that and I'm not, which is kind of why I'm like, maybe I should get someone else to do it for me.
Right. Yes. And so, yes, so that's one of the things. I don't know. So the last publishing contract I signed, I want to say the royalty percentage was 25, maybe 40, maybe it gone up that high. I'd have to think about
Really?
it. Well, yeah, but that was like 20, it was probably 2012 or 2013.
Uh-huh.
And at that point, they were having difficulty, that 5,000 and
Right,
six
nobody
percent
wanted them. Yeah.
was being hard. And I think that by then the Harlequin lawsuit had been decided, and it was clear that people
Mhm.
were spending a lot of ways to figure out how not to pay you.
Yeah.
But those were ebook only, I think, the last contract.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And even then it was not advantageous. I don't have that contract anymore.
Well, and that's the thing about it is it never truly will be,
Right.
that's I always say if I went back to New York houses, I would only do it if I knew that they were guaranteeing their marketing muscle behind it because they can do that if
Hmm.
they choose to.
Right.
They just don't, usually. So I always kind of liken it to a one of those giant fishing trawlers in the middle of the ocean where they cast out like a 100-mile net
Right.
where they're looking for big tuna and they collect all this other fish that just die in the process,
Right.
and I don't wanna be that little dead fish in the net, I wanna be the tuna, so how do you do that, right?
Right, because I've been the dead fish in the net, and it's not
I
great.
know, right?
You're in these
It
author
sucks.
groups with the same publisher, or imprint, or editor, or whatever. There was a lot of those, and you're like, "Well, Joe got front page of whatever." That all these things are
Yeah,
gone now, like RT
yeah.
magazine or something, and I got like a little mention, in the corner of
I
something else,
know.
and I understand. Like I begrudge no one anything, and it's just a fundamentally unfair system. But some of the authors I know who are going hybrid are hoping that, and this is like right now, not 5 years ago, are hoping that with the whatever marketing the publisher does, that they can then amplify it with their own self-published items.
Which makes good sense, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly,
But that's
exactly.
a certain level of savvy and a certain level of management. Because when I was last with a publisher, you'd have a slot for the publication, and they would move it up or move it back as it were.
Mhm,
Because I was not
mhm.
important enough to get this big split,
Yeah,
to get the
exactly,
September release, to be frank.
exactly.
So then it was a little bit more difficult. But I'm looking now to see if authors are going to be able to use that going forward, because publishers, I don't want to say they've stopped publishing romance, but they really got out of the business. But
Yeah,
they do need something. They do need bread and butter beyond celebrity books, as far as
mhm.
I'm concerned.
Well, and that was the other thing too. So when my memoir came out, and my editor was kind of like the it girl in New York at the time. I
Hmm.
mean, she was like the editor.
Hmm.
And to lose her killed me because when you lose your editor, you lose your advocate in a publishing house. And all of a
Yep,
sudden, the editor that took me over was like, "Who are you?"
I got one of
And
those
so
emails. Was awful.
right around the same time that my book came out, was shortly thereafter, Snooki's came out, same imprint.
Hmm.
And, the publicist in the house was delightful, but she wasn't tasked with doing a ton of stuff for me while they were sending Snooki all over the planet
Hmm.
on a book tour. And I get it. My book wasn't Snooki's and Snooki had, that hideous TV show and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But to me, that's just emblematic of the Kim Kardashianization of America, which is like a dagger to the heart to me.
Hmm.
But it just drove home to me that you know Gwyneth Paltrow can get a book deal for a cookbook even though she like very publicly was proud to say that she basically didn't eat for years.
Right.
She was like on a macrobiotic diet and ate like sprouts,
Right.
and yet she got a cookbook deal simply because she has a platform.
Right.
Keith Richards, a drug addicted stoner, simply because he's famous, got a kid's book deal. Like, I really just don't want my kid reading a book written by Keith Richards, even though he's perfectly entertaining if I go to his concert.
Right.
Madonna, who had the coffee table book on S&M,
Right.
gets a kid's book deal.
Hmm.
That kind of stuff was just like sticking in my craw too much. And I was like, all right, me and traditional publishing are not going to see eye to eye, because that stuff bugs me that it's 100% platform driven,
Hmm. Yes.
to the point that it's irrational. But apparently that's what the population is asking for.
Maybe, I don't know. They're paying a
Yeah.
lot of huge advances, and not those things are not always paying out. So I'm not sure. I don't.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know if
what I
that's
wonder more.
sustainable. Like, I don't know if the whole
Yeah, yeah,
Instagram, like, mommy blogger, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way, but I don't know if that
right,
whole thing is sustainable. Because
right.
if you go to I haven't been to a bookstore in quite a long time, but I think they're back open.
Yeah,
But if you go, it's just like Instagram person about, whatever,
Yeah.
influencing, and then she's going to write about
Yeah.
parenting. And I don't
Yeah.
know, it doesn't feel substantive.
Authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, it is. It's so one-dimensional. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, part of it was just that over the years, publishing houses just became one more cog in the wheel of a gigantic
I
corporation,
know.
and it's
Yeah.
all
Huge media. Yeah.
yeah,
Conglomerate.
exactly. So, yeah, so but there's this little part of me who, from when I got into publishing early, and kind of the people that were the people I got in at the same time with, who I kind of view as like kind of my class, like people you were in high school with or
Right.
whatever. I've kind of watched some of them, getting that huge book deal and then the movie deal, and I'm like, I want that, damn it.
Hmm.
So I may have to suck it up, right?
Well, yes, because in order to get A, you would have to do B. It's a debate
Exactly.
I have not often with myself, but I was talking to another author about it. And we were talking about some other author's movie deal or whatever. And I was like, she was like, "Do you want that?" And I'm like, "I don't know if I want that, but if I do, then I would need to hustle for it." You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I don't think the fairies are going to, fall out of the sky.
Right.
And pluck me out of obscurity, but it's just one of
Yeah.
those things I do think about as my writing matures, because I think my writing is better
Yeah.
now and
Yeah.
I'm a better storyteller than I used to be, for sure.
Yeah, me too. I agree. Yeah.
So what are you writing now?
So that's a good question. When I was in the real thick of it, I was cranking out 7 books a year of rom-coms because you basically had to feed the machine
Right.
constantly to keep, your readers, or they'd go on to somebody else.
Hmm.
I kinda tapered that back, and then, like, with the pandemic, like, I had a book due with my editor, like, the week everything just shut down, and I just couldn't even go there.
Hmm.
So, that got delayed. I did one other book last year, and I've got a book that I need to the good news is I write fast. I have a book due to my editor in August, and I need to get cracking on that. Um, but I have a memoir that I've been playing around with, although memoirs are really hard to sell without a huge platform. So that may end up being self published. And I have a couple of commercial fiction novels that I have started and stopped and started and stopped and started and stopped 10 times, that I have sworn that I'm going to get cracking on too. So I've got a whole lot of this and that. I started this business not focusing on one genre.
Hmm.
And one time I was at RWA, and I was talking to a writer who was also just kind of lamenting publishing. And, she looked at me and she said, "Your problem is that you aren't focused on one thing."
Nope, you're not in a
And
lane.
it's true.
Yeah.
I was writing all kinds of things. I was just writing what I wanted to write.
Hmm.
And she said, "You need to pick something and stick with it." So I watched her make $1 million in a year. I was like, shit, she's right. And anyhow, so yeah, so I did focus for a while, but I also just kind of really want to expand what I've been working on and just get a little bit more creative. So I think that's feeding that right now.
So what was let me say, the thrust of your first memoir?
The first memoir was kind of just its own thing that could never be anything more than that. It was so my brother-in-law lived in Africa in the late 80s and early 90s, and in 1990 he brought parrots home for the family.
Okay.
And so my book was called Parrothood, a memoir of caring for a vengeful parrot who's determined to kill me.
Hmm.
And it was about, so my brother-in-law brought us a parrot for Christmas who was like the demon seed. And we had a new baby, and this very needy, sad bird that had been like taken out of a tree in Africa and hated humans
Hmm.
and needed way more care than my newborn baby did.
Right.
And just kind of over the years about what it meant to integrate her into my life and my family and everything. So that's what that book was about. The title had to change, speaking of the vagaries of publishing, because some nutty woman decided that she owned the word parrothood.
Oh God, this always happens
And
in publishing. I hate to
I
say
know, right?
it.
And my book was announced on Publishers Marketplace, and it went out on like a listserv to every library in the country.
Hmm.
And this woman went on this like mission to destroy my book before it was published by going to every library in the country and threatening to have their website shut down
Oh my
if they
gosh.
didn't take my book out because she owned the word parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can't own a word,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can own Kleenex, but you
Right.
can't own a word.
Right.
The name Kleenex, a branded word
Right.
like that. But the thing is, libraries didn't have lawyers and they didn't have the ability to fight this crackpot.
Right.
And it happened to be the same time that the publishing world had collapsed on itself.
Right.
And so my publishing house normally would have had like an army of lawyers like stepping on her like a bug.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden they were like, "Ooh, budgets are cut everywhere. We're not doing this stuff."
Right.
And so that was kind of like the beginning of the crushing of this book, which was kind of heartbreaking. And so we had to change the title of it in the middle of all that. And my original title for it was Bite Me Anyhow,
Mm-hmm.
but you couldn't do that because Walmart wouldn't allow Bite Me because that was too suggestive,
Yeah, Walmart has a
which is
lot of
why I went to
influence back then. Yeah.
Parenthood.
Yeah.
And then we ultimately ended up with the name Winging It. But when I got my rights back on that book,
Mm-hmm.
I did change it back to Bite Me because it was kind of the most fitting title anyhow.
And so if you were to write, what would the new memoir be about? Because you're right. That bird is that's very specific. That's very specific.
Yeah, this memoir is I like am reluctant to talk much about it,
Okay.
to be honest.
Right.
And I have a great title, but I can't tell it to you
Right.
because I don't like to put anything out there too soon.
Mm-hmm.
But this I kind of had this pretty whacked out upbringing, and it included when my parents were going through a deeply bitter divorce. My dad threatened to kill my mom at my wedding,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom had many, many, many issues, and she was kind of like a frontier, professional woman who was like front of the line of the epidemic of what am I saying? The like legal narcotics,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of has to do with all that. It kind of ties it all together. But it's funny. It's actually a funny memoir. It's funny, but it's also, poignant, but so I can't not write smart ass, that's my thing.
Yeah.
So
But so okay. So do you foresee in the future confining yourself to one lane? I guess.
um I don't think so because I mean, I know that the common thinking in publishing is you've got to do that. And like, for instance, what I'm doing and what you're doing generally, they say that your readers don't migrate over to your other,
Right.
like, so I have another series that I've kind of dabbled with too that would be more like mystery, possibly kind of cozy mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And they say like a romance reader is generally not going to hop over to cozy, and
Right.
the same goes like women's fiction readers don't go to romance generally,
Right.
although romance readers are much more open to going like to women's
So going the
fiction.
other way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes against good sense to do that, especially if you get a strong enough readership and that kind of stuff to then start writing what they aren't going to read.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't want to not write something because of that,
Right.
because I want to write what I want to write ultimately, in addition to writing what makes sense for me to write.
Right. So do
I
you?
mean, do you kind of think that too?
Yeah. No. So
Yeah.
well, okay. So I used to alternate between writing either romance or women's fiction and then writing legal thrillers, going
Hmm.
back and forth, and that made me happy.
Right.
What ultimately, Sky Warren, I think at some point she and I had
Right.
a conversation a few years ago where she was like, but what sells better? And I was like, well, I think it's X. And she's like, do you have numbers for that? And I was like, no,
Mm,
so
yeah.
I actually went
Yeah.
back. This is a very painful exercise and not something I recommend for anybody, but I went back 10 years and I used like Tracker Box or something and put in all the,
Right.
the royalty reports and looked to see what was the best selling. And it wasn't what I thought at all. Like
Oh, is
I,
that
I
interesting?
was way off. Um,
Yeah.
and so the legal thrillers sell better. So one of the things I
Yeah.
think I want to do going forward is to try to focus on that. But And also getting divorced made me not so like hot in the romance department right now anyway.
Yeah, right.
So I think at least for the next, well, no, I'm going to finish the romance I'm writing now. But after that, because I like this story, I like the heroine a lot. And so I would like to do her story justice. But after
Mhm.
that, I think I'm going to try writing 3 legal thrillers in a row. And I wrote 2 in a row and it wasn't so bad. I thought I couldn't tolerate it,
Awesome.
but it wasn't so
Yeah.
bad. And then after that, I'm going to assess, because then that sort of, I will have written like, I think 14 legal thrillers, which will probably be
Great.
about even to the romance. And then I want
Yeah.
to, then it'll be like maybe next year, 2022, and the divorce will be behind me more than a couple of weeks. And I'll have like
Right.
a better
Yeah.
sense of like what I want to do going forward. But it's hard because I really, really enjoy writing the women's fiction, but it doesn't sell
Yeah.
as well. And I think my heroines, at least, okay, the feedback that I get is that my heroines are a little too damaged and people don't like them. Um, and I haven't, so
Interesting.
the people who like the books love them, and people who hate them, but it's a huge
Yeah.
split. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
get, it's a wide gulf. So it's not pleasing. It's not
Right.
generally pleasing, and there's books
Right.
obviously on the top charts in Amazon that are quite generally pleasing to people. Um,
Yeah, but, I mean, I know I'm not good at doing generally pleasing, I think that maybe that's a problem.
well, generally pleasing, I think earns more money, and that's where
Yeah,
I am.
exactly.
So if I please myself, oh, I'm just thrilled. Like
I know, right?
I'm like a pig in heaven,
Note
and I'm
to
like,
self.
I'm all happy. I'm like, is she difficult? Yes. Is her upbringing awful? Yes. Is she hard to love? She is, but I'm rooting for her. You may not be, but I am. So staying,
Damn.
so staying in one lane, I do find difficult, and I'm going to reassess it in a year or so.
Yeah,
Um, and who knows, maybe then I'll have figured out some magical formula of what I really want to do going forward,
right.
storytelling wise. But for now, that's what I'm going to do. But I find it hard, but the conventional wisdom, and I have a lot of very successful author friends who have written like 25 of the same kind of book. And if I had done that, marketing
Mhm.
would be easier. Like a lot of things,
Right.
I'm not unclear. I can see it. Like I can see it would be
Yeah,
easier to be like, what do you write? Well, I write dark romance, or I write new adult, or I write
yeah,
whatever it is, shifter or romance or paranormal or
right.
whatever that is, or historical. And they're all this kind of book. And my readers are always going to be pleased because they know what they're going to get.
Yeah, because it's so niche and
Mm.
so specific.
Right.
Yeah, exactly,
And
and I'm
my
not even niche enough for that.
No, and so my readers, I just looked at my emails today. There were like 3 of them. I love this. I hate this. Why this is not the
Yeah,
same as the other thing, or oh,
yeah.
and they're very vocal. So so I guess that's good.
Okay, you're hearing.
But I don't get those emails that my other friends get, which is, "We love you. What's next?"
I know, like, and then also just like that, they'll just fall on their sword for you, you
Yes,
know?
yes.
That's I know, that's, how do we get that? I'd like to know.
I don't. So I have super fans because those people write often as well. And
Yeah,
so I know them and they seem consistently to like it, but it's clearly a certain kind of person. And so I either need to reach
yeah,
more of that certain kind of people,
mhm.
let go of the idea that I'm going to be universally loved. I'm not holding tight to that.
Yeah, me
Or in
neither.
the alternative, make my peace with the storytelling I do and the money that results from it and just keep doing that. But
Yeah.
those are choices that I'm gonna have to like meditate on, because all the books I'm reading now, self-help, and like the answer to everything is, well, if you just meditate on it, you'll figure it out.
There you go, exactly.
So that's my
We're just
plan.
gonna say some affirmations and it's all gonna work out.
Exactly. If I could just do that enough. And I tried it yesterday, but I'm not consistent. So
I'm super inconsistent on that. I know. I need to meditate every day and I don't do that. I need to do a lot of things I don't do.
I know. So I'm working on all that. So what is it that you hope for your storytelling future? I mean, bigger than the books that you're writing now, but what is
Yeah,
the bigger
yeah,
story
yeah.
that you think you want to tell going forward?
That's a really good question. I mean, I ultimately I love if I am telling stories that help people feel good one way or the other. I
Hmm.
mean, that's the great email that you get for somebody who's been through, troubles or trauma or whatever, and that, your book gave them some comfort. I think that's such an amazing thing.
Hmm.
And it's a gift that we can do that.
Hmm.
For me personally, I really want to write something that's like a big book and a capital B big book,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and that does end up with a film deal. So that's kind of my goal.
Mm-hmm.
Wish me luck on that, right?
Yes, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
I mean, it comes back to that. I can do that. I know people
Exactly.
who have done that, and my books are as good as theirs. And, we all know there's an element of fairy dust in this business.
The
And so it's a
zeitgeist,
matter
yeah.
of,
Yeah.
timing. So, but making it so that you're there if the timing works. You know what I mean? I guess
Right.
is the thing.
And I do think
So,
about that. So sometimes, like the last couple of weeks, when I haven't written much of anything, and I think, well, but if you want things to happen, you have to continue to produce the art.
yes, exactly. And
Uh,
that's like the past year.
mm,
Thank you very much. Yeah, totally.
mm.
So, yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm trying to light that match under my behind
Okay, so
again.
so I want to thank you so much for doing this today, and I want
Oh, thanks for
to
inviting me.
ask you to continue to post pictures of Pippa because it delights me on a
Oh,
daily
thank you. I've been really
basis.
bad about it lately, and I've got so many. I just haven't gotten around to it. So I'll get Pip back on there. She's right next to me right now, being cute and adorable and sleeping.
And how old is she? Is it 4?
Pip is
2?
2.
God, it's
She's
only been 2
a little
years.
baby.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, she's a good girl.
Mhm,
She's a sweet dog. She's just got a great personality. I found her during the pandemic. I discovered that there's people who meet up at this field not far from here.
mhm.
And it was a little problematic during the pandemic when you were staying distance from people
Right.
because as soon as people have their hands in their pockets, she assumes they're pulling a cookie out for her.
Yeah.
So she would, like, go right up on them and jump at them. I'm like, "You can't do that." So we were working on that. I mean, like, got the canine good citizen. She did the whole class,
Right.
so she knows better. But then, like, when she goes up with all these dogs, she's like a pack mentality
Right.
instead of, like, good behavior mentality.
Right.
So, yeah, so I'm trying to get her reel her back in a little bit on that because everybody does not have cookies in their pocket, and that's not cool to jump on people.
No, we so
When they're
the
old.
last dog I had, I really had to actually, so I didn't have a problem because what people would do is they'd go, "Oh!" And, with that, like, super high voice, and the dog's like,
Right.
"What?" And then, he would jump on people, and at some point, somebody was just like, "It's okay." They're like, "I call this dog over. Like,
Yeah,
I can't
yeah,
be
yeah.
upset, over this dog's, like, enthusiasm."
Right.
So
That's good attitude.
it has mostly worked out, because people who are like, "Oh, look at your dog," are usually ready for what's coming. But I would have
Mhm,
appreciated if he had jumped on less people because with the trainer and everything, it's perfect, and we got the front door working and all of that. But the high pitched,
mhm. I
might have
know,
a treat.
it makes me crazy,
And then,
and she'll do that with the people next door, they have little kids, and she'll just go careening over there,
mm,
and, these kids are so sweet, but they're little,
right,
and, they and I think they still kind of confuse Pippa and Rosie and Millie, her older sisters,
right.
So, Rosie's not gonna topple them, but Pippa will. So they stand there trusting that Rosie's not gonna do it, but it's Pip,
Right.
knock them down. Not good.
Yeah. But anyway, dogs are delightful. They're so
I
delightful.
know.
And they have brought much joy to many people during the pandemic. So my hats are off to them.
Oh, isn't that so true? I'm so glad we had Pip for this because she was my girl. I'll say one last thing though that was a bit of a problem is we had this steep hill to go to our backyard, which is flat,
Mhm.
and then the woods abut it, right?
Right.
And so when she was little, she was like, "Woods, yay me!"
Mhm.
So I talked to the trainer, and she's like, "Well, you should just get a really long lead.
Mhm.
That way you can, like, catch the lead before she goes off into the woods."
So
And so, this was early in the pandemic,
right.
and it was 100-foot lead, right, to,
Mhm.
like, the webbing that, like, a leash is made of.
Yes.
So, Pip had gone to the bathroom in the middle of the yard, so I go out there and I stop to, pick it up, and the ball was right there, and I threw it. Well, Pippa took off,
Mhm.
and the lead whipped around my ankles,
Mhm.
and I got, like, I don't know what degree burns they would be, third-degree burns on the back of my ankles that were so, so, so raw,
Mhm.
but no one was going to hospitals or doctors back
Right,
then, you know
yeah.
what I mean? So I had this, like, major wounds from like that.
Mhm.
So, she was great during the pandemic, except for that little injury problem.
I,
I still have like scars that just like these lash marks across the back of my ankles.
I
It was
can't.
fun.
No, I can't say anything. I did also that lead thing. Apparently, we all get the same advice. Except I remember mine. It was blue cotton, and it would drag through the grass before the dog got
Oh
to the
yeah.
woods, and it would be
Uh-huh.
wet. So then
Oh
once I put the dog in the car, because sometimes we would drive to these huge parks and do that whole thing with the lead, I had
yeah.
this huge, soggy, wet, muddy,
Uh,
like you know,
uh,
dozens and dozens of feet of like webbing that I had to like
uh.
pop in my trunk, and that would get all crusty the next time I had to go out.
Yeah, so I know because they do get stinky.
Yes.
Yeah, so now I took her out in the back because it's so hot in the daytime. I've been taking her out in the backyard in the morning,
Mhm,
and she goes up on the hill, which is like it's steep, and I don't want to be trucking up there.
mhm.
And she eats grass,
Oh gosh.
and it's like fine, eat grass, but the thing is then at 4 in the morning she wakes up throwing it up, and
Exactly.
that I'm not cool on. And so I was like trying to get her down off the hill today, and she wouldn't do it. So I'm like, I got to break out that long lead again. But I have PTSD from it now, so I don't know.
I don't know. The long lead is what actually, that was the thing plus treat training that finally got the dog to come to me from that problem.
Yeah,
Like, because she
yeah,
would be out and doing her own thing, and I'd call her, and she'd be like, I don't know.
yeah, right. Yeah, I
So
could be here or there.
I know. What do you got? Because what do you got that's worth coming back for?
That's right. What do you got for me?
So
What have you done for me lately? Just like
exactly.
publishing.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh gosh. But with that, I'll say thank you so much again for agreeing to talk. And
Well, it was fun talking and catching up. It's been a long time. Well, good. Well, safe travels for you. I can't wait to hear how things are. Keep me posted.
I will send you a picture of my child on a bike.
I do. I want to see. I want to see.
No doubt. But thank you so much.
Okay, good talking to you.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye. This has been A Time to Thrill with me, your host, author Aime Austin. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll share, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. It will help others to find and listen to my conversations with brilliant creators. Also, please hit the subscribe button on your podcast app. In addition to hosting this podcast, I'm also the author of the Casey Court series of legal thrillers. They're available wherever books are sold, your local library, and also an audiobook. You can follow me on Instagram at ThrillerPod, find me on Facebook at Casey Court Series or A Time to Thrill. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with you soon with more great conversations.